Today we're going to be talking about resin, but first we're going to talk about some safety things that are important about resin. Resin, even though a lot of the versions that you can find easily at craft stores or online don't have a strong smell, the fumes are still toxic, so it's important to work in a well-ventilated area. If you do not have a well-ventilated area inside your house, you can also work outside. It's important for your safety and for your lungs. Breathing the fumes can cause some really serious health issues. Make sure also you have some gloves, so when you work, your hands are protected. Make sure that you have clothes that you don't care about, or you wear something in case you get a resin on you, because it's really hard to get off of things once you get it on there. Make sure you tie up your hair if you have long hair. Make sure any jewelry you have is either taken off or put somewhere where it cannot be damaged. Like if you have like a necklace, tuck it into your shirt or take it off. Also, don't forget, if you have pets wandering around, make sure that they are not in danger. Make sure they're away from the fumes, but also make sure they can't jump into your work area. I speak from experience for so many of these. I had a cat jump straight into my molds that were like, I just finished all of them. Yeah, we had to shave the cat because he got epoxy all over his fur and we couldn't get it off of him. So please be careful, take care of your lungs, and wear safety equipment, and be outside. If you don't have a proper ventilator, wear a mask and still be in a well-ventilated area. Ventilators are probably preferable, but they're kind of hard to come by right now. So make sure you are safe. The next part will be showing you different things you can do with epoxy, including ways to get rid of bubbles, and I'll also include resources for other ways to do it that I don't have the tools for at the moment. So you have other people to look at to figure out how to do these things. So things that you can use in resin, you can use lots of like small things. You can use a lot of things that you can just find around the house. Like for instance, today I'm going to be using sand, shells, rhinestones, glitter, pigments you can find. You can use lots of different kinds of things as pigments. So there's alcohol inks. There's pigments made for resin. You can even use tattoo ink, and it works really well. Other things you can have or use for resin is molds. Lots and lots of molds. I have this box and like other boxes just filled with different kinds of molds. You can also pour resin if you want permanently attached to something, which I also have examples that I'll be showing you today. If you have like small jars you want to fill with things, keep in mind though, when you're using a small jar, even with the lid off for it to dry, it will still take a lot longer to dry. So you want to make sure that you have the jar positioned how you want it. This jar, I turned it outside after 24 hours, and you can see like the little bubbles that formed on the side because it was turned outside after 24 hours. So it just kind of shifted a little bit. Just interesting, you know? Other things that you can use also in resin is other resin. You can see lots of layers in projects. Like if you want to use resin where you pour a layer, you paint something, pour a layer, paint something, you can layer resin like that. You can layer resin have different colors or like different things added. If you want to have an object at a specific layer, you can pour resin up until that point, put the object after the resin is dried, and then pour the resin to make sure the object won't move. You can also use other resin in a way where if you have like little droplets of resin that like got stuck to like a mold or something, like this little mold has a couple little droplets that I can just pop off and use as little bits to be in other projects. Like this teddy bear, little paws are made using little bits of resin that were just stuck onto molds. That way I don't have to mix enough resin to have all these different colors. I just have these small bits available for use. I also always have an extra set of molds to pour any extra resin in when I am done. That way I can use all the extra resin that I have and it doesn't go to waste. So I just have a collection of little charms and jewelry making stuff made from extra resin. You can also use things that you normally use in jewelry making in resin. You can either embed it before or drill bits in afterwards to allow yourself to use charms and such. Some molds have holes already made so that you don't have to like drill holes. They're just ready to go pendants. You can also use charms and beads if you want uh, in your resin creations. Just be creative. One of the things I'll be showing you today is I have a bunch of lost piercings that I have found on various floors and surfaces, and obviously I don't want to use them for any of my piercings, so I'm going to use them for a project. So you'll be seeing lots of different things today. For most resins, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. You can either measure this out using measuring cups. Most kits, if you buy them offline, will come with little cups with little lines to measure. You can also measure using scales or other means. I'm actually going to be using these to measure because I'm making large amounts because I'm working on something a little bit, or actually several things that are a little bit bigger. So the first batch I'm going to make for the first layer on a few of these pieces, I'm going to be using some of the last of these 2 bottles since I have like more now. So there's equal amounts, so it's going to be like really easy to measure. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix them for 2 minutes. You want to stir in one direction without moving up and down too much because then you'll add bubbles and you don't want, unless you really, really want bubbles. But most of the time, most people don't really want bubbles because they want that like clear look of resin. So you're gonna have to make sure that you stir slowly, stir for at least 2 minutes, and then keep in mind that the temperature of your resin is going to affect how much work time you have. So the warmer it is, the less work time you're going to have, but the less bubbles you'll have. The colder it is, the more bubbles you may have, but the more work time you have, because this is like a chemical reaction that causes heat, but also heat will speed up the process. So some people will do things like use heat guns or lighters to like speed up the process. We're trying to like do layers quickly. I will not be doing that today as I do not have a heat gun and I don't feel like using a lighter and I have no real reason to speed up the process at all. So first what we're going to do is we're going to take these 2 and we're going to measure them out in my little cups. I already have my stirring popsicle stick and I already have my little jar that I use for making medium amounts of resin for when I want to have some resin, a little bit of resin, I don't know. You kind of just have to eyeball it for like how much resin. And then I have my mold already set aside for any extra resin to go to. For the piece I'm going to be working on, or one of the pieces, I actually have several laid out already. Every piece I'm going to do today, I already have laid out with all the pieces I need to add at various times in front of me. All the molds are already set in front. Like this rose is already in the mold that I plan on partially filling. And then the piece in front of me actually is a ceramic piece that has been glazed and has glass fused to the bottom. In the process of firing, it actually ended up breaking, but I want to see what happens if I pour resin. But because I fire it when I'm using glass, I fire ceramics on a slab to protect my kiln. I have the piece set on top of parchment paper in case it leaks farther. And I have that parchment paper actually on top of the baking tray I already used for polymer clay because it's very convenient. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to be stirring. So I need to do some things. I need to put on all of my safety gear. As you can see, I have my gloves on. I have my mask already, and this is a mask that has a filter. It's not as good as like a proper industrial strength mask with filter, but it's better than nothing. And I'm in a well-ventilated area. I have multiple windows open on all sides of me, including the room back behind me. So there's lots of airflow. The cats are all elsewhere. They got distracted with some treats. And I have an apron on over my clothes. My hair is tied back So just make sure to always be safe and think about things that could go wrong. It's better to plan ahead than to be caught unawares. So I'm going to be mixing the epoxy, but first I'm going to measure it out. Make sure it's equal, even though it should be equal given the fact that this is the end of these two bottles. I'm still going to measure it to be sure. If your epoxy is not in equal amounts, sometimes it will not set properly and will have some flexibility to it. And sometimes it won't set properly in a force way. So try to get as even and equal as possible. 1-to-1 ratio is the best. Now remember, even without um, even without the mask, you probably won't be able to smell much of the fumes. But just because you cannot smell them does not mean they are not there. One way to reduce bubbles while you're actually pouring is to pour very carefully. So you take your jar that you're stir, you're going to place this carefully. You're going to pour down the side like this at an angle, because the higher up that you pour, the more bubbles you're going to introduce while you're pouring. It's a slow process. Because of the windows, my resin's a little cold, so it's moving a little slower. But I have more work time that way. I don't have to worry about more bubbles. Pro cons. Alright, after that, I'm going to look at the time and stir for 2 minutes in one direction, slowly to not introduce new bubbles. Because if you move really fast, you're going to introduce new bubbles. See you in a few minutes. Once you have your main resin all nicely stirred together, if you want different colors or if you want to add different glitters or like different things, you can pour them into smaller containers. Like for instance, I'm going to pour a small amount in here, bring a little bit of red resin for something. Remember, the pouring along the side reduces bubbles. Alright, I need to be careful with what I touch because I have lots of resin on my gloves. I can't feel it on my hands, obviously, so I have to be really careful to be aware of where the resin is. So I have the first layer poured on several of these projects, but I have to continue pouring more layers. But I haven't poured anything yet on my largest project. So I'm going to stir the red together for another project, and then I'm going to change how I'm filming so you can see what I'm doing. So here you can see this is a piece that I have that I have already set a bunch of things inside. There's a bunch of rhinestones, some glass, there's sand on the outside. So this is a ceramic piece that I made that cracked right here. While in the glaze fire that also melted the glass, because there's also like melted glass at the bottom. And then I have, so because it cracked and like the glass came out, it fused the slab meant to protect the kiln to itself. So we're going to see what happens when we pour resin into it, because I don't actually know what's going to happen. So here's my pre-mixed resin. I'm going to pour it on this side over here. Oh, so some of the rhinestones you can't actually see like which side is up anymore, which is really interesting because I've never covered rhinestones in resin before, so this is like a first for me, so it's very exciting to see. So that's pretty much it for the first layer. I might paint some things on before I add more layers. So I also have some other things currently going that I'll show you in just a moment. I just wanted to show you real quick. You can see the resin coming out. It is very slowly oozing out. So we'll see what it does. I think it looks really cool, so I'm just hoping it looks really cool at the end too. So over here I have other works in progress. So I'm pouring the next layer on several of them. I'm pouring over the top of the rose because it's not going to fit entirely into this mold. But I'm still trying to encase it as much as possible in resin. And push the rose down because it is floating up. So for the next one that we're going to work on, it is one that has a bunch of piercings that were lost, I mentioned earlier. We're going to put the next layer of resin in, and then add some more lost piercings. After you put things into the resin, if you want to move them, you can use a variety of tools, such as like a popsicle stick. You can use like little poker things. You can also use like, if you have tweezers or anything like that, you can also use those. I'm going to use a little poker. Looks like this. Many art kits will come with them. Otherwise, you can you can use a toothpick. You can also get them from the grocery store, actually. All right, the next layer we're going to work on is the layer for my book project, which is right here. It is the thing that the mask that I showed everyone earlier is for from the previous demo. So pour that layer. And I'm going to throw in all of the polymer clay things that I made before, such as the fox mask. The hard part is picking up small things and not losing them like I just did. I have honestly no idea where that went. Maybe I'll find it someday. Alright, I'm going to cut it for here, and then next time you will see the last layer being poured for some of these things. So when you're done with your epoxy, as it's drying, move it someplace it can dry without anyone interfering with it. No animals bumping into it, not you bumping into it, where it can just dry. A flat surface, because otherwise the epoxy is just going to run to one direction or the other. So I have a bunch of pieces, so it'll take me a while to move all of them to my drying place. One more safety reminder. So when the epoxy resin is setting, it starts to get hot because it's an exothermic reaction. So don't touch it. I'm not entirely sure how hot it can get, but if it's anything like plaster, then you could possibly get burned. So once those 40 minutes or less, if you're working in warmer temperatures, are up, don't touch the epoxy. I was reminded when I was moving all my molds over to my safe space for them to dry, and I noticed that already some of them were already getting really hot. So just remember, don't touch the epoxy. And then make sure that you clean up. So resin and water don't mix. They make this like really weird white substance that like clouds whatever your water containers you have over. So I usually take something and wipe out my containers super thoroughly. I'm gonna make sure that there's no resin left on the inside or the outside. Oh well, the mask does not want to cooperate. I'll go back over it and wipe it down a couple more times just to get all the resin off, so that way it's nice and clean for the next time. All right, remember to always be safe. Have your safety equipment, keep your hair back, apron on, mask on, well ventilated. It's getting a little chilly because it's getting later in the day. And make sure that you have everything set up before you even start pouring the 2 parts of resin. All right? Be safe and have fun.